Welcome to Debate 2019. I'm Luann Young, and this is my co-moderator, Mr. Tim Murphy. We're happy to have representation from all parties running in the October 21st federal election on our panel today, and we'll ask each to look at issues of concern to voters on a local level as well as on a broader spectrum. The debate is 1 hour in length, and so it will be fairly quick moving. Candidates appear in an order established through a random draw we did earlier. The same questions will be asked of each candidate, who will be allowed 2 minutes to give their response. The first candidate to respond will, in the next round, be number 5, and so on. Candidates have been asked to adhere closely to their response time limit, with a total of 4 questions from us asked to each one of them. Then each candidate will have the opportunity to ask just one of their co-candidates a question of their choosing. The question will be 30 seconds or less, and responses have been allotted 2 minutes. With the focus on the privilege we have and our ability to vote, On TV wants you to be an informed voter, as with educated consumers who know where the best deals are and the best customer service is. Knowledge benefits you and helps you get the biggest bang for your hard-earned buck when you're out buying what you need. We want to help you browse through issues that are important to you on a daily basis, so that in the end, you can cast your vote with confidence, both in your candidate and in the system. Everybody ready over there? That's awesome. And Tim has our first question.
So in the random draw, the first respondent will be Ms. Zuccato. So, Ms. Zuccato, this week Huron Central Railway announced plans to cease service next year because current freight volumes don't provide the economic rationale for the $40 million capital investment required over 5 years to continue to operate. The Government of Canada itself acknowledges, quote, most rail services in the Western world require financial subsidies from their respective governments, unquote. Case in point, the GTA recently received nearly $1 billion for transit projects. Also, successful business models exist wherein Indigenous communities have received support to operate rail lines. So, with over $48 million in economic benefits at stake with cancelled passenger service alone, plus the environmental benefits, will you pledge support for improved rail service in Northern Ontario, and how?
Yes, I will. So this is very important to keep our infrastructure lines open for social networking and for the economy and for freight. These people rely on these types of forms of transportation, like the railway. So some of these communities are so remote, the only way to get to them are through railways. So this is extremely important. The People's Party of Canada wants to unify Canada, and to unite, we have to keep these open. Sometimes the government looks at issues to see, well, what's the best bang for our buck? Are we going to get an investment off of it? But this is for the better of all the people and all Canadians, to keep our railways open and to help in the Indigenous communities. They need these types of delivery to decrease the cost of living up there. It's horrendous and it's unfortunate. So this is definitely something that the People's Party of Canada supports.
Thank you, Ms. Zuccato. We'll go now to Geo McLean.
Hi, I'd first like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Anishinaabe people and in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. To your question, the Green Party platform holds rail as one of the key platform projects. It includes $600 million per year over 4 years to invest into rail. These projects, both the Huron Central Railway as well as the project proposed by the Missinaba Cree First Nations, fits perfectly in with our platform. It improves carbon footprint, it improves accessibility to other communities, as well as opens up the area for tourism and industry. So to sum up, it's all part of the large plan that we have for Canada and for Sault Ste. Marie.
Thanks, Mr. McLean. We'll go now to Mr. Sonny Spina.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the question. You may not know this, but we actually engaged in a bit of a debate earlier this morning with the Chamber of Commerce, and this was a hot topic. And we had a lot of questions from the audience, and we had a lot of questions online and through email and phone calls about this. So this is clearly a topic that is important to people in Sault Ste. Marie and is important to people in Northern Ontario. What is very clear, what was made very, very clear, crystal clear in the news release, is that this company has been promised support from the federal government 4 years ago, and that support hasn't come. My pledge to everyone in this area is that as your MP, I won't be your MP only at election time. I will do it 24 hours a day, and I will fight for services like this to continue and to promote the economic benefit of Sault Ste. Marie, our First Nations partners in areas in Northern Ontario. We recognize that Missinaba Cree right now is the very first First Nation to own an operator rail certificate, and that they are absolutely nothing short of inspired in their pursuit of operating rail lines in the northern areas of Sault Ste. Marie and connecting the north with those rail lines. I want to do everything in my power to continue working with them, to continue working with all of our partners, to put an end to this issue once and for all. This issue has been going on far too long in Northern Ontario without a resolution, and I'm perfectly ready, willing, and able to step up to bat and find a permanent resolution to this once and for all.
Thank you, Mr. Spina. We go now to Ms. Sarah McCleary. Sarah.
Thank you. So, as Sunny said, we spoke about this morning, and my response there is the same as here. We are with the NDP. We are 100% committed to supporting rail in Northern Ontario, whether it's passenger or short line. We are at the provincial and the federal level committed to it. It's within our federal commitments to Canadians to get passenger rail running in the north and to support rail for industries. And in our Northern Ontario platform as well, we're committed to getting the Ontario Northlander up and running as well as the Bear Train. We know that the Bear Train itself supports the tourism industry, as you said, $48 million in tourist dollars, plus another $6 million in tax revenue coming in through that industry. So it's important to support that, but then at the same time, it's important to support Huron Central because we know that AECOM, Domtar, and Algoma Steel are all impacted if that rail stops running. So we need to make sure that those jobs are protected and that we're making sure that the businesses can get their product to market. And we also have to make sure that we're doing that via rail rather than roads, because if the rail stops running, we'll have 20 to 30,000 more trucks on the roads in this area every year, and that will take such a toll on our roads and our highways, and that will be an added cost. And so we need to make sure that we're doing it the right way and the environmentally friendly way and supporting the rail in Northern Ontario.
Thank you, Ms. McCleary. And finally, we go to Mr. Terry Sheehan.
Well, thank you for that important question, Tim. And since being MP, I've worked very, very hard on securing a number of infrastructure funding for various projects, almost $250 million. In January, Algoma Steel came out of CCAA protection. We had a funding of $90 million to support Algoma Steel. You saw recently at Tenaris, we announced $16 million. Well, those are some companies that use Huron Rail. And so in tandem, I have been working with the local stakeholder group headed by Joe Fertizzi and Steve Butlin. I've worked with Huron executives, and I've also worked with officials in Ottawa. And we had great progress. We need the province and the other stakeholders at the table, but we ran out of runway just before the election, and I've committed to them. I've been going door to door with my letter saying that I'm going to continue to make sure that we get our fair share of infrastructure funding, including rail and the Port of Algoma. So I'm in constant dialogue with them. It is tough, and we want to make sure that they're there for the long-term viability. We don't want to see this movie again. We want to make sure that the plan is in place so that we're not spending more taxpayers' dollars in a couple of years. So I'm committed to that. On passenger rail service, you know that the Conservative government was the one that pulled the subsidy that triggered this entire issue. Since being elected, I worked with various stakeholder groups. So from when I was city councillor to a member of parliament, I was able to secure almost $200,000 for a business plan for Missinaba Cree, because they were starting from scratch. Everyone else had walked away and they came forward. Since then, they've got their ROC certificate, the rail operator certificate, a number of things. So I continue to work with Chief Gauthier and the rest of the stakeholder group. In fact, I met with him last week. All candidates now have received that business plan as of Friday, so that we can prepare to take a look at things such as track fees and a whole bunch of items that need to be done. My background is in business and economic development. I'm committed to working with them to get passenger rail service up and running for the area.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Luann, I turn it over to you now for your first question.
Thank you very much. One of the hot button issues of late in Sault Ste. Marie is the building of a ferrochrome plant on Algoma Steel property. This is one of those issues that on either side of it, people feel strongly about. Some are really happy with the employment and the community development that the plant will bring, while others, including several local doctors actually, are concerned about potential health risks and damage to the environment. Mayor Christian Provenzano has indicated that we're only in the very preliminary stages of the development and reassures us that details will be paid to Indigenous concerns along with health and the environment. If your party is successful on October 21st and you do get to Ottawa, what will you do to address these concerns? And we're starting with Gio McLean on this round.
Yeah, so before any of this goes forward, we need rigorous and thorough environmental impact assessments. And as it stands now, nothing is in place for doing that. It needs to be, this kind of program needs to be designated by ministers of environment in provincial and federal jurisdictions, and that hasn't happened yet. So as a community, we need to reach out to those routes so that an environmental assessment can be done. Before any of that can happen, we need to consult with Métis people because the Noront has not yet consulted with them, and we have to ensure that the process is free and prior informed consent, not just consultation. There's a lot of legislation around that, but ensuring that it's consent, not consultation, is an important part of this entire process, and I will make sure that that's given priority.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLean. Mr. Sonny Spina.
Thank you very much. This is an incredibly important question. This is an incredibly important topic to Sault Ste. Marie. And I mean, I really don't think there's anyone in this community or anywhere around here who's on the other side of this issue. I want to see jobs in Sault Ste. Marie, I want to see economic growth in Sault Ste. Marie, but also we want to ensure the safety of every person here. I don't think there's anyone else that disputes that. I think everybody is on the same page that we want to make sure that whatever happens in Sault Ste. Marie, our people are healthy and our people are safe. Now, I was lucky enough to be in the room when Noront was in Sault Ste. Marie, and they described what their safety procedures are and what their environmental procedures are. I have to tell you, I was quite impressed with what they presented. But also in the back of my mind, I kept in my mind and I kept in my thoughts the fact that we certainly need an independent third party to assess the environmental impact of what could happen in Sault Ste. Marie if this plant were to be built here. I'm happy to see that the city is on board with that. I'm happy to see that the city is starting to allow for community consultations, which we know is scheduled for October 23rd. I really am encouraged by that, and I'm encouraged by the amount of people who have come forward and had and expressed concerns and that they've brought that forward. Let's face it, I don't believe there's a single elected official in our area here who is qualified to answer those questions when it comes to what are the experts' opinions on what are the environmental impacts. So we need to turn that over to experts. We need to get answers from the experts so that we can give that to our community, so that we can continue meaningful consultations with our First Nations partners, and they can have absolutely all the answers that we need from the experts before a decision is made to put a shovel in the ground.
Mr. Spina, thank you very much. Sarah McCleary with the NDP.
I don't think I've ever seen the city so, we say divided, but honestly I think everybody's pretty united. I'm getting almost universal no's from everybody I've spoken to. That being said, I recognize, as an elected official, there's a responsibility to people in the Soo who are looking for a job. So we do need to explore the possibility of bringing those jobs here. But I've maintained that we do need to make sure that we have independent, science-backed research showing that this will be safe to bring to the Soo, that it won't poison the Great Lakes, because the fact is, the Great Lakes support more than just the Soo. So we need to make sure that it's not going to harm our environment. And, I live in Jamestown. I've been open, it's pretty out there. That's maybe a kilometer away from where it's going to go. So, I am right there with people and their concerns about what this will do for the environment. So we need to make sure that that is backed independently and not research provided by Noront, and also not only a provincially mandated environmental assessment, because we know the Conservative government in Ontario right now is loosening environmental regulations like crazy. So we can't just rely on that process. We do need to make sure it's independent. But then at the same time, it's very, very important that we get the consent of the First Nations before we move forward on any of this. They have to have a seat at the table first and foremost, and if we don't get their consent, this does not move forward. And I've also maintained that it doesn't matter what the result of an independent assessment is. If 90% of the Sioux says they don't want it, it's also the responsibility of elected officials to acknowledge and respect those wishes as well.
Sarah McCleary, thank you very much. With the Liberal Party, Terry Sheehan.
Well, thank you very much for that important question. And right from the start, I've stated what I'm about to say now is that projects like this have to go through a robust federal environmental assessment. My background in business and economic development, I've been through these processes, and I can tell you that the Liberal Party will make sure that top scientists, medical people, researchers will be involved in that third-party assessment. And I can tell you that if it fails that assessment, then I will not support it, because the health of the people of Sault Ste. Marie are critical. I have a daughter, 18 years old, and you know, we owe it to our children to make sure that this is done in a proper way. So we will make sure that that happens third party. The previous Conservative government, we know that they've muzzled scientists. They've closed down experimental lakes not far from here, and so I don't think people really trust their scientific analysis. Plus, there has to be consent with First Nations and the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis people here. And I've spoken to the chiefs, and I've spoken to Métis leadership, saying that what I said before, there has to be that consent, consultation, and process involved, and so I'm committed to that as well. And we need to make sure that we are able to put that forward in a way that people are going to trust the science and going to trust that interchange with people. And yes, October 23rd, there is a public consultation that the City of Sault Ste. Marie and the Economic Development Corporation are putting on, and I would invite people to partake in that.
Thank you very much. And with the People's Party, Amy Zaccato.
Yes, we believe that would strengthen the economy. It is here long term, but in saying that, it's also extremely important that it meets all the environmental assessment requirements. They don't currently have a plan. If they said that it's all fail-safe, but you need a plan put in place if something happens. We are completely surrounded by water. They want to use the St. Mary's Way as part of their system. So it's extremely important for us for drinking and to have safe areas and to keep the future of Sault Ste. Marie safe. And I understand the City of Sault Ste. Marie right now is looking for industry to come to the Soo, and this was something that was proposed. But we need to be very careful with this. We have the steel plant here. Yes, it is here already, and yes, there has been a lot of issues with the steel plant just through general citizens getting ill through the steel plant. But now technology is getting better, and people are getting, companies and industries are improving in their environmental and their climate requirements. So we would support it if it met these environmental assessments and passed all the grades. And one of the things you have to think of is if the people of Sault Ste. Marie honestly do not want it here, whose money is going to be wasted when all of these tests are done and we just push NORA out anyways? So you have to think of that. I think city officials should really consider, do the people of Sault Ste. Marie want it?
Thank you so much, candidates. Appreciate it. And now Tim has question number 3.
This question will be around opioids, addiction, and mental health. Local drug strategy committees and local government unanimously agree that there is an acute need for a level 3 withdrawal management facility in Sault Ste. Marie. Mayor Provenzano has expressed frustration that the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care has yet to respond with news about the request for funding carried in a motion passed by Council in early 2018. Likewise, Sault Area Hospital says it has heard nothing about its bid for the facility pitched to the province more than 1 year ago. On August 19th of this year, the federal government announced it would contribute $47.5 million over 5 years to help build a recovery center in Iqaluit, proving willingness from the federal government to fund addiction and mental health facilities. With the Level 3 withdrawal management facility proposal seemingly stalled at the provincial level, should the federal government step up and allocate specific funds to address the under-resourcing of treatment facilities in Sault Ste. Marie? Candidate Spina, you're first.
Thank you very much. I really and truly appreciate this question, because this is something that we certainly need to talk about here in Sault Ste. Marie more often than we do. Certainly it fills the headlines, and we see it in the headlines, and quite frankly I've written some of those headlines over the years about opioid poisonings and opioid issues in Sault Ste. Marie. This is something that I've been acutely aware of for a number of years. This is something that I brought to everyone's attention well over 2 years ago when I hosted the very first town hall meeting on opioid issues in Sault Ste. Marie in March or April of 2017. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about, and I've already spoken to private stakeholder groups in Sault Ste. Marie, and I've pledged my unending support to bring this facility here to Sault Ste. Marie. And that means whether I'm elected or not, I'm going to still push for this facility to be here in the Soo, because I know that our people will benefit from it. I know personally from speaking to people who suffer from these addictions that they have called themselves and asked to get into treatment facilities, and they've been told to call back in 3 months. Now, they've shared with me that they're going to try and make it those 3 months, but they're not sure if they can. That's not acceptable to me. I will always push for these things to be resolved in our community. I will always push for services to help our communities and help people here exit the drug lifestyle, because we recognize that while we can help with harm reduction strategies, we can help reduce the harm that opioids cause in our communities. We certainly can do that. We need to have a way to help people out of that lifestyle for the long term so that they can heal and they can continue on and help reduce the harm that's caused to their friends, their families, and themselves. I'm fully willing to support that. I want to push for that going forward, and I want to help our community heal from what's been going on over the past few years.
Thank you, Mr. Spina. We now go to Ms. McCleary.
The NDP is committed to almost immediately declaring a public health emergency when it comes to the opioid crisis. We need to make sure that we are acting with urgency on the crisis, and that the funds are put into it. So 100%, I will absolutely be making sure that the Soo is getting the funds for that level 3 withdrawal facility that we need. I've lost people that I went to school with to addiction overdose, and I have a friend whose brother has overdosed multiple times. He had to go to Kingston for treatment, and I don't know how he could have done that if his parents hadn't been able to support him. I know people who can't afford to do that, and we shouldn't need to be sending people away. We should be able to treat them here at home where they're comfortable. And we also want to make sure that no matter where people are in their journey, in their road to recovery, we want to make sure that they're supported. So we're also going to make sure that we have overdose prevention sites available here in the Soo, so that if somebody isn't quite ready to go to the full treatment center yet, they have that safety net. And then at the same time, we are going to hold Big Pharma accountable, because we know that this wouldn't have happened if drug companies hadn't been pushing these medications and encouraging doctors to prescribe them when not absolutely necessary. So we're going to make sure that they're held accountable, and hopefully maybe get some closure for families who have lost people to addiction overdose.
Thank you, Ms. McCleary. We go now to Mr. Sheehan.
Well, thank you very much for that very important question. And the opioid crisis in Sault Ste. Marie is just that. It's a crisis, and it's a crisis across Canada and in Ontario. And we have put money in the 2018 budget, in particular $233 million, of that $150 million in emergency funding for provinces and territories. And I have attended many local stakeholder groups. I brought in the healthcare minister to town to meet with the drug enforcement task force, with service providers, police, healthcare professionals, First Nation communities, local leaderships from the Soo and Prince. And we are all working together, and you're right, the level 3 facility is absolutely critical importance. We've put money in play. Our healthcare minister has signed an agreement with the provincial healthcare minister for $51 million. They had to match that. $102 million in total is sitting there ready to be accessed. I have been continually putting the pressure on the province to access that funding. The resources are there. I've met with the mayor, I've met with the MPP, and we're going to continue to do that. And in particular in this platform, we have made statements about infrastructure funding, because we do go into agreements, as you know, federal to provincial, down to the municipal levels, but we are having problems in certain provinces, like Ontario. So we've made a bold statement that said that you need to prioritize your items from these communities over the next 2 years, or we're going to directly start funding communities. So it will continue that upward pressure. We need it now, but we've also made a statement that if we don't start seeing it, we're going to do that, and we'll do it through top-ups through the gas tax funding, and I will push for that sooner than later if they do not move on this by spring of next year, because we have to get elected and then go into that process. So the money's there. If they're not willing to use it, then we will directly fund the city.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Now, Ms. Zuccato.
Yes, well, at the People's Party of Canada, we have a healthcare platform policy that is fantastic. So there's $40 billion across the board between provinces and territories. That is the GST part of the taxes, and we're willing to allow the provinces and territories to keep that part of the tax. So keep that as $40 billion annually under the conditions that it's targeted and strategized to be spent directly on the healthcare system and directly on for opioids and mental health and hospitals, and bring doctors here and these kinds of items, because over the years, because of the different level of government, the federal government has had their hands tied on this because it's under the jurisdiction of the provincial government. And sometimes it's one of the things when they try to meet their budget is to cut, and they cut, and they cut so much that the people of Canada are hurting. So under the People's Party of Canada, we are willing to allow them to keep this money and the GST part, and what that does is it gives the federal government the control that it needs to make the provinces and territories spend the money where it needs to be spent in the healthcare system.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mrs. Zuccato. And now we go to Mr. McLean to wrap up.
The Green Party will immediately call a national opioid emergency, and that would include decriminalizing possession and prioritizing harm reduction. That allows for access to testing of people's the drugs that they have. It allows them to access resources that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise, and in a timely manner. A lot of the cases of people who end up in treatment it's because they've been booked for possession or they overdosed. So this would allow them to access the resources before that happens. But it's more than just the harm reduction process. It's more than treating addiction. It's about treating trauma. It's about treating mental health. So we also have a mental health plan that includes increasing health transfers to provinces based on need, based on the amount of mental health issues in that province. And it's about leveraging the resources in the community and the community itself for supporting people with addictions and mental illness. I'm a mental health worker. This is what I do pretty well every day, and it's terrible to see, but there's a lot that can be done, and the Green Party has plans for every aspect of it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Luann, I turn it over to you for the fourth question.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. It's difficult to believe that in 2019 there are actually people in this country who don't have safe drinking water. As a matter of fact, 14 of 618 First Nations were under at least
400, sorry. You said 14.
Oh,
400.
400. Thank you. 400 of 618 First Nations were under at least one water advisory between 2004 and 2014. Some would say that the issue is at the feet of First Nations. The federal government assumed legal responsibility, though, for Indians and lands reserved for Indians in the Constitution Act back in 1867. It can't spend decades controlling First Nations and then claim the right to ignore some constitutional obligations because they cost too much. The Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on the actual costs estimated that Ottawa is providing at least 30% less what is needed for capital expenditures. How will your party finally fix this, in some cases, 25-year-old problem? And we're going to start with Sarah.
I want to start by saying I love the way that you frame that. You're 100% right that these issues are absolutely a federal government responsibility, and it's shameful that it has taken so long. There are people the same age as me who have never had clean drinking water, and it's disgusting. And so I'm really, really proud that Jagmeet has committed to ending all boil water advisories by 2021, immediately committing $1.8 billion to addressing the issue and going forward from there. Like he said the other day when somebody asked him, are you giving a blank check? Well, that wouldn't be a question if this were happening in Toronto or Ottawa or Sault Ste. Marie. It would just be happening, right? We would just have the money, and it wouldn't matter how much it cost, it would get done. And I think that that's how this needs to be looked at, that this is not acceptable in Canada, and it needs to be taken care of immediately. And and I'm very, very happy to say that the NDP is 100% committed to doing that and doing it quickly.
Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you very much, Luann, and that was a great question and a great observation. It has been too long, 25 years of neglect. When I ran in 2015, we promised to have a new relationship, a nation-to-nation relationship with First Nations, and we've moved forward on a lot of recommendations. And since, over the last 4 years, we've invested $2 billion to improve water systems and to upgrade public water systems on First Nations. And so we have eliminated 87 drinking water advisories across the country. But we are also committed to eliminating all long-term drinking water advisories by 2021. It's an ambitious plan, but it has to happen. We had a good start, but we need to complete, and we're committed to doing that when re-elected. And we don't have to think about faraway places. I made an announcement on at Batchewana, the Rankin, and with the chief, and we're putting money forward in a phase 1 plan to rectify some water issues that they have on their particular First Nation, and it's moving forward. We're partnering with them, and we're investing in infrastructure here locally to rectify water issues that they're having here, and we're doing it across the nation. So we need to continue to move forward, and by 2021 we want to eliminate all boil water advisories, all water advisory, drinking water advisories. So thank you.
Ms. Zuccato.
Yes, we believe in clean drinking water for all Canadians. Actually, in our platform, we're going to do 2 things immediately: drop the carbon tax and make sure everybody has clean drinking water. We're not going to do it one community at a time. We're going to do it immediately. It's unfortunate that we have Canadians, people inside Canada, and Indigenous communities that have unsafe drinking water. So the government priorities right now are upside down, and they've been spending social money instead of putting the money towards making sure that we have these types of safety requirements for all Canadians. There was something else I was going to say, but I forget. And we don't have a dollar amount set on it. Whatever cost it is, we're going to make sure that it's done, and done deal. No more consulting. Just, that's a necessity for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Gio McLean.
So again, this is a much bigger issue. There's a lot more that's related to, and ultimately it's an issue of reconciliation with Indigenous people. Specific to your question though, we do have money earmarked specifically for water infrastructure and also transportation and electrical infrastructure for northern reservations. So we will end all boil water advisories in reservations. But we also have the $2 billion earmarked for the settlement ruling from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal that stated that the Canadian government owes Indigenous youth and families money for restitution for not properly taking care of them in foster care. So when there's already issues around the legal and social barriers to accessing health care and for accessing traditional lands and legal barriers to self-identification, self-determination, and Indigenous sovereignty, we have to look at the whole thing. And yes, we'll end those boil water advisories, but we'll address the other issues, the more fundamental issues as well. That includes implementing the United Nations Declaration of Rights on Indigenous Peoples and calls to actions from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and calls to justice from murdered and missing Indigenous women. Looking at the big picture, we want to address all those fundamental issues as well as the key and running issue of boiled water advisories.
And Mr. Spina.
Thank you. And it's very sad that today we still have to talk about clean drinking water for people when we know that that's something that people should have. The Conservative Party of Canada is fully committed to the truth and reconciliation with Indigenous communities, and we want to ensure that any investments actually translates into measurable results in their communities. We are fully supportive of investing in safe housing, good quality healthcare, and good quality drinking water for individuals that are in these communities. And that's something that's incredibly important to us. It's important, though, that we actually take these investments and translate them into meaningful results on the ground that will actually help individuals in those communities. Unfortunately, the Liberal Party of Canada doesn't get to talk out of both sides of their mouth on this issue. They don't get to tell you that they support it, and then we see video of Justin Trudeau making fun of an individual who's come there to express her concerns on the drinking water. It's important for us to actually make meaningful results, have meaningful reconciliation with these communities, and provide the economic opportunities for them to flourish within their communities. We want to have real results on the ground that will actually help these communities, and not just say things and then act a different way when we think we're in private.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spina. Those are our questions from On TV moderators. What we'd like to do now is what Tim calls our round robin, and each of the candidates now will be able to direct one question to one candidate. And because we started in a certain order with the first question, we're going to go backwards, and we're going to start with Mr. Sheehan. You can ask any question of any candidate you would like, sir.
So we didn't prepare anything, which was good. So in thinking about some of the questions that we were asked today at the Chamber and whatnot, and some of the other questions, we've been talking about our immigration pilot project that City Council and the Mayor has endorsed, the community has come forward. So I guess I'm going to ask Amy to my left, since you're the closest, is why is Maxime Bernier so opposed to immigration and bringing the skilled workers that this community needs to grow? Because the community has said that we need immigration, we need skilled workers, but that's what I'm getting at the door. So.
Okay, so Maxime Bernier and People's Party of Canada is not against immigration. We want to increase the number of economic immigration, which is exactly what the Sioux Pilot project is bringing in, 10,000 economic immigrants. So we are all for that. We have met a ceiling for immigration. We don't have the housing and the social networking here. When an immigrant comes to Canada, they need to be integrated into society, and Sault Ste. Marie does a great job for that. We have new to the Sioux community members who welcome the newcomers and find housing for them and help them set up their house and clothing and groceries and help them with their language skills. We're lucky in the Sioux that we have that. In bigger cities, they don't have that. So the immigrants come to Canada and they're a little bit lost, and they group up into their own little communities, and they don't integrate, and they stay isolated from the rest of Canadians, and that's not what we want. We can't open up borders and let everybody in. Canada has to stay strong, and we have to enable the situation in this and know that economically, that's awesome that people want to come here, and it fills up the holes in the skills that they have in our communities for work-wise. But at the same time, if we just let 500,000 people in to Canada, it hurts our social housing network. It hurts in taxes and burdens the Canadians that are already here. So it's very important to have a limit on immigration. It's definitely an item that needs to be discussed, and it's something that we're not afraid to discuss, and we're not afraid to say a great number for immigrants annually is 150,000. In 3 years through the Liberal government, it's the whole population of Nova Scotia. We only have 36 million people here. In the next 20 years, I want Canada to still look like the Canada I know and I grew up in. So.
You can take a moment to wrap up.
Oh, okay. So I really appreciate that you brought that up, because I want the people to understand that we are for immigration. There is a ceiling and a limit to the number, and we want an increase in the economic immigrants that come to Canada.
Thank you, Ms. Zuccato, and thank you, Mr. Sheehan, for the question. Take a moment, Ms. Zuccato, catch your breath, because we're going to allow you to ask the next question.
Oh, okay. Well, my question is
you're
for
ready to
Mr.
go.
Spina.
Good for you.
Yes.
It's to Mr. Spina?
It's Mr. Spina. So I find that the Conservative Party and the People's Party of Canada platform is quite similar. And one of the things that we both agree on is cutting foreign aid. The People's Party of Canada is cutting foreign aid to almost all of it, and we say that under the social programs. We have a lot of billions of dollars that get spent annually in social programs. But if we have a crisis or something overseas, we'll definitely, we're Canadians, our heart is there and our wallet will be there too. The Conservative Party is cutting 25% of overseas. And I'm curious why only 25% when your party is supposed to be conservative, yet Maxime Bernier is saying we're cutting it all off.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that question. Now, this is really important. Canada is one of the best countries to live in the entire world. We need to be leaders around the world, and we need to help individuals. My life has actually been dedicated to helping people in this city and across this province and across this nation. I want to continue doing that, and I love living in a country where we recognize that other people around the world may need our help, and we're willing to invest and help those people, because you know what happens when you help those people? They become your partners. And they become your partners that you trade with, and they become your partners and allies around the world when issues need to be addressed. And we want to cultivate those relationships and cultivate those partnerships. Now, why are we proposing to cut 25% of spending to foreign aid? Well, there's a few reasons. We recognize that Canada is currently giving money to countries that are actually quite well off, and countries that are competing with Canada, and they're competing with our interests around the world. Now, we don't want to do that. We want to keep that money here, and we want to put that money back in the pockets of Canadians and help our people get ahead. And we also want to take $700 million of those funds and redirect them to the countries that actually need it the most. We want to take it from the rich countries and actually send it to countries that really need our aid, and bring it back to people here in Canada so we can help them get ahead.
Mr. McLean, you're up next.
Mr. Spina, your party has huge amount of resources, huge amount of people power, and yet we don't have your full platform yet. NDP put it out in May, Greens put it out in September, and so on and so forth. So I have enough confidence in your party that it's not a resource issue. It has to be a political ploy or some other decision that isn't in the best interest of democratic issues and not in the best interest of voters, because they can't make an informed decision without knowing what your platform is. So where is that platform? Why have we not seen it?
Thank you so much for asking this question. This is an incredibly important question, and I love the fact that I get an opportunity to answer this question and bring people up to speed. You know, I think we're 28 or 29 days into the election right now, maybe a little farther. I'm not 100% sure, because every day kind of blends together now. But what I can tell you is this: every single day since this election began, our party has actually released and introduced a new policy. We've submitted it to the media, we've sent it out, and we've done incredible announcements every single day since this election began. We've announced every policy that's going to help Canadians get ahead, that's going to help put money back in people's pockets, and it's going to help invest in healthcare and social services across this great country. Now, unfortunately, because of the antics of Justin Trudeau, our country's been distracted. Our country's been quite distracted, and we haven't been able to fully inform everyone in the public. Now, we recognize that introducing a complete platform all at once with thousands and thousands of pages is quite difficult for the public to digest all at once. So we have chosen to introduce it a piece at a time, so we can actually inform people fully on exactly what each component is and exactly how it's going to help Canada and Canadians get ahead. And we've been doing a great job of that. If we could get our counterparts to get out of the way in the Liberal Party and allow these platforms to come forward, we could have an easier opportunity to fully inform voters. Now, our platforms are great. They're going to do everything to put money back in your pockets. We have our universal tax cut that's going to put an average of $850 back in the pockets of everyday Canadians. We have our act to repeal the carbon tax that's going to put lots of money back in the pockets of Canadians. We're going to remove the GST from your home heating and energy costs, and we have the most robust environmental plan that's ever been put forward by an opposition party in the history of this country. And that plan focuses on three things: investing in technologies, not taxes, a cleaner, greener natural environment, and taking the climate change fight global. Now, those things have been released every day, and we've been distracted by the antics of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, so they haven't gotten to the public, but we can't wait for it to get there so everyone can hear what we're going to do to help you get ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Spina. Now you can take a breath because it's your turn to pose a question to the candidate of your choice whenever you're ready.
Absolutely, thank you. So, you know, my fellow candidates and I have been to several debates and had several opportunities like this to speak to the public over the last few weeks. In fact, I believe this may be the 6th or 7th opportunity that we've had. Now, what we haven't had is an opportunity to talk about ethics. Now, in my former role and a lot of roles that I've had in the past, I've had the unfortunate opportunity of having to either give evidence or give statements against fellow co-workers. I've had to tell the truth and stand up and stand for what's right for my community and stand up for what's right for investigations. My question is for Mr. Sheehan. My question is not whether or not Justin Trudeau is guilty of the ethics violations that he's been accused of, because we already know that he is. He's been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner now 3 times. My question is, why didn't you stand up and do what the people of Sault Ste. Marie expect you to do, tell the truth, be honest to Canadians, and tell them that you would not support Justin Trudeau in firing those 2 women who stood up and did nothing wrong?
Well, Mr. Spina, I think that I have to remind you that it was the Peterborough MP that was, Conservative MP, that was actually arrested and in irons and shackled and taken away for election improprieties. And I can tell you that for me, that what has transpired is very simple, and it is, what happened was when those 2 women came to our caucus and we had a discussion, we ended up having back and forth. We did things differently. Quite frankly, we did things differently, unlike any other Prime Minister or Premier has done before. At the same time, while we had open discussions on TV for the people to see the discussions and all the witnesses going forward out in public, people like Ford and Hillier. Ford ended up just firing Hillier and throwing him out of the Conservative caucus. It happened again and again. So we ended up having a major open process, and I can tell you that for me, it was absolutely a time for us to be engaged. I fielded lots of phone calls. I talked to a lot of people. I spoke with everyone, and we did do things differently in an open and transparent way. And I can tell you, though, the Conservative Party has 0 track record on that when we take a look at ethics and what has happened with members that have been arrested or thrown out of the Conservative caucus for very inappropriate manners as well. So,
All right.
Thank you so much. I believe because you have been so efficient with your time
We still
and your
have-
responses, we have some time left.
Ms. McCleary still has a question to pose.
Oh, my apologies.
That's all right.
My apologies, Ms. McCleary. Go ahead.
No problem. So I guess my question is for Terry as well. I guess Terry said we didn't know this was coming, some of us. So kind of just, I'm going to base it on, what I've been hearing from people at the doorsteps. And, in 2015, Justin Trudeau ran on some really great promises. He promised to do things differently. He gave everybody a lot of hope. People came out in almost record numbers to vote. And then he let a lot of people down. I don't know how many people I've heard say, I voted for Trudeau and now I'm really disappointed. And he broke the promise on electoral reform just because he didn't feel like doing it anymore. And however many other promises that he's broken in the last 4 years. So I guess my question is, how can the people of Sault Ste. Marie trust, how can you expect them to trust that the next 4 years of a Liberal government would be anything different, anything more than broken promises again?
in 2015, we had a very robust platform, and that's why I decided to run. There were a number of commitments in that platform, including the investment in historic infrastructure. Here in Sault Ste. Marie, our unemployment rate was very high. There was a handful of people working at Tenaris. Our steel industry was in distress. And I looked at the platform as a whole. And we did do what we said we would do, including putting a price on pollution. We've taken a lot of bold and hard steps forward to improve Sault Ste. Marie in Canada. Like I've mentioned, we are able to do $250 million in investments for this particular community, which is helping our kids work again, helping our friends and family secure employment. We are moving forward in a very robust way, but we're not out of the woods yet. We still have more to do. And I can tell you that I'm very proud of the accomplishments that this Liberal Party has done for Canada. Over 1 million jobs have been created in 4 years. That's significant, absolutely insignificant. We've put a price on pollution because we know that the economy and the environment go hand in hand. Without looking backwards and slipping backwards, because I think that's one of the worst things, that we can go back to 10 years of Harper Scheer cuts and mismanagement. What we need to do is continue to move forward, to continue to work on our successes, and that's why we're having a lot of people coming to us this election. I also have been at the door, and people have told me that they voted for other parties before, but they're voting for us because they know that we need to continue to move forward, and we don't want to slip back to the old days of derision, mean-spirited politics. They want growth, they want prosperity, they want innovation. So I'm very, very pleased with the commitments and what we've delivered here in Sault Ste. Marie in Canada.
All right, so as Luann was, thank you very much, Mr. Sheehan. Thank you all very much. Now, and welcome to Live TV. We are about 7 minutes ahead. So we're going to throw another curveball at you folks. We've received a question online that I'd like to share with you, and I'd like you each a minute and a half for our timers to respond.
And what we're going to do is we'll take the order of the first question we used.
We'll go back to the original order,
So
all right?
Amy
So Amy, you
Zaccato will
lead
be
off.
first.
The question came in actually as posed directly to Mr. Spina, but I'm going to pose it to all of you because it deals with an issue that is very important, to, I believe, to Sault Ste. Marieites, all Ontarians, as a matter of fact. It comes from Morgan. From Facebook Live. She mentions that, Sonny, you're a well-known volunteer for people with autism and disabilities. And she's wondering how it's going to be for you when the premier, the Conservative premier of the province, has made these cuts that have affected the Ontario Autism Program. Is there anything that you can do at a federal level or that you'd be willing to do to sort of offset that? And that would go to the rest of you. Is there anything at a federal level that you can do for citizens of Sault Ste. Marie who are suffering because of the cuts to autism programs by the provincial government? So now we're going to start with Amy, okay? And so we'll start there again.
Yes, so I'd just like to re-implement our healthcare policy that we have and mandating to the provincial jurisdiction that this money that they have across the board annually, $40 billion, gets directly installed into the healthcare system for programs like autism, mental illness, addictions, doctors and nursing staff, and opening up level 3 of the hospital. All of that $40 billion. So it takes the control out of the province from doing cuts to the programs that the people need the most. At the front line, we see it, and it's hurting our citizens. So we are prepared to do that and give them the money and put the responsibility on the province and mandate to them that it has to be spent in that manner. That's what we are prepared to do.
Thanks, Ms. McConnell. I keep saying that, Ms. Zaccato. Sorry, Amy. I'm sorry. Mr. McLean, anything on the Green Party as far as autism goes?
Yeah, so personally, on top of being a mental health worker, I'm also a behavioral interventionist and an educational assistant. So those cuts were, on a professional level, affected me directly. I also have cousins who are autistic and cousins who are very active with Algoma Autism Foundation, one of the founders, in fact. So I'm very well aware of the issues around this and what needs to be done. A lot of the education cuts, as well as for LGBTQ youth, there was the sex ed curriculum cut. So all of those issues I want to support, and part of that with the Green Party is, as I mentioned earlier, the health funding transfers to provinces from the federal government. We want to increase those based on need, and part of that need, especially in Sault Ste. Marie, is autism services. So that's all part of the mental health and health in general plan that we have, is address the needs of people with autism and neurodiversity and developmental delay.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Spina, now we go to you. Can answer Morgan's question directly.
Morgan, thank you so much for writing in, and thank you for watching. I really and truly appreciate it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to answer this question. Now, and you're right, I have been involved with the Autism Foundations here in town for a long time, and trying to help out whenever I can and wherever I can. They're an organization that has a great place in my heart, and I love everything that they do. That's why I'm really happy to tell you this. So, our party has actually committed a few things. Number one, we've actually done a written guarantee to every province. A written guarantee states that not only will healthcare funding to every single province across this country not be cut by a Conservative government, it will increase every single year by a minimum of 3%. And that's healthcare and social services. So now we know that every province across this country, if we're elected in October, or sorry, if we're elected in the next 2 weeks, every province across this country can rely and count on predictable, sustainable funding for the foreseeable future for healthcare and social services. Now, when it comes to autism, I'm really happy to let you know we've also committed $50 million to a national autism strategy to help folks coast to coast across this country. And I'll tell you that if elected as your MP, I want to fight for every dollar of that, because I know that in the region, in the District of Algoma, we do have higher than normal rates of autism. We do have people here who are amazing volunteers, who are incredibly active in the community, and they're doing so much to support the families. And I'm really happy to have the opportunity to let you know what we've pledged to start, so that we can move forward to support families as well, and I really want to continue to be a part of that. Thank you for the question, Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Spina. And Ms. McCleary, your opportunity to answer.
So thank you to Morgan as well. I have been a part of almost all of the rallies outside of Mr. Romano's office, and including, I've been out there with the autism families protesting those cuts. It's what the provincial government did is just, it's not right, it's not fair to those families. So the NDP is also committed to developing a national autism strategy, and we're also committed to making sure that the federal government is taking its responsibility in terms of healthcare seriously. So there are the federal transfer payments to the provinces for healthcare, but it's also up to the federal government to uphold the Healthcare Act and make sure that the provinces are meeting their responsibilities to the people of their provinces. And so we'll be making sure that Doug Ford is helping the people in Ontario the way he's supposed to be, and that those federal transfer payments to Ontario are going to the people of Ontario in the way that they're supposed to be, including the parents of kids with autism. My nephew has autism, and my sister's been affected by these cuts, and it's hard to watch the families decide to sell their home because they don't know how they're going to afford treatment for their child. So I'm right there and fully prepared to support them any way I can.
And Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you very much for that question, and I certainly have heard that over and over again at the door. And that's what happens when you have a Conservative government that doesn't have a platform, that makes a bunch of promises and then sets forward to make cuts. And we've seen cuts, and these cuts to autism were absolutely wrong, and the people have reacted. I've met with parents from the Algoma Autism Society in my office, and I see the stress, and I see how devoted they are and how difficult it is, and we're going to continue to work with them. And one of the things that we have done is we're going to be doubling the child disability benefit for parents with autistic children, which is really, really important. We're also announced our healthcare plan, where we're going to make sure that every family has access to a doctor or a healthcare professional team, because some of these parents don't even have the healthcare folks that they need. And the question overall is, who do you want negotiating with Doug Ford? Scheer, who are great dance partners, Ford and Scheer, or do you want Prime Minister Trudeau, who's going to stand up for people and make sure that we get this healthcare delivered and the autistic children can have what they need for their future? And on a quick note, locally, I was at the sensory play equipment at Bellevue Park, which was really, really great to see.
Thank you
And
very
you know
much.
what? That is our time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Luann, I'll leave it to you to say goodbye for us.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your attendance. Amy Zuccato, Gio McLean, Sunny Spina, Sarah McCleary, and Terry Sheehan. And we appreciate you watching on TV Debate 2019. Do not forget to vote. Thanks for watching.
If you're out and about tonight, go down to Grand Gardens. Strive is having another debate, $5 to get in unless you're a Strive member. Appetizers, cash bar, and you can ask them questions too. We'll see you tomorrow on Mornings with Luann and Tim.